Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Friday Symposium. Today is August 1st, and there is an enormous amount going on. What we're going to be doing today is announcing a special initiative on the question of American history and the American Revolution, which is extremely important because what we are discovering, which may have been obvious to many in some degree or another, is that here we are at the 250th anniversary of the founding of our republic, and most Americans, especially younger ones, are quite unaware of even against whom we fought the revolution, why we fought the revolution, and what is the quality of the presidency of this republic, which is really unique. Now, before we get to that, I just want to say that the LaRouche Organization will be releasing a white paper. You know that we picked up on right away the fact that Tulsi Gabbard was releasing these documents on Russiagate, and the white paper is going to be entitled Worse Than Treason, the Actual Motive Behind Russiagate. Here is the introduction, which I wrote, in which I make the point that the target of Russiagate, that is John Brennan, James Clapper, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, obviously Hillary Clinton had an interest in winning the election and wanted to defeat Trump. But then after she loses, what's the point of trying to sandbag and stop the Trump presidency? If you care about the United States, then you would think you would want the presidency to be successful. But no, they continued the witch hunt, including impeachment of President Donald Trump. And ironically, the impeachment was because Trump was threatening to cut off weapons to Ukraine, which he really ought to have done. Anyway, based on what? The lie was that Russia colluded with Trump to get Trump elected. And it turns out, as Tulsi Gabbard revealed, that the entire intelligence community knew that this was not the case. And if anything, there were indications that Russia may have preferred Hillary Clinton, on whom they had a lot more devastating material, shall we put it that way. And they were withholding that until after the election. If we're even to believe that, I think all of this is suspect. My point in this introduction is that the real issue is the long-held desire of the British, going back to Sir Winston Churchill and his Operation Unthinkable, which we covered in a previous symposium with Richard Freeman, which was to pit the United States against Russia, to have a war against Russia, a preemptive nuclear war against Russia. And if the United States and Russia were engaged in such a war, the British Empire would remain the dominant power. And these people are crazy enough to think they could win a preemptive nuclear war. And if a few 100 million people died, what of it? The world is overpopulated anyway. That plan is what is active. If President Trump understands that that's the motive behind targeting him, then he will be able to effectively deal with the situation he is currently facing. If he doesn't understand that, if the people doing the investigation don't understand it, it would be very useful to see John Brennan behind bars, or Comey, Clapper, Obama, Clinton, some of these other criminals. They are criminals, they are traitors. But what is needed is for the United States to resume its role in the world as an anti-colonial Republican power. So with that, I'm going to bring on my two guests, my husband, Christopher Sayre, and Robert Wesser, both historians who are launching a special project, and I'm going to let them go ahead and tell you about it. So please go ahead.
Okay, well, has become increasingly clear, painfully clear, that the American people really have completely lost the conception of what the U.S. presidency represents. It's supposed to represent both domestically and globally. And I'm not just saying the president, but the presidency, because we haven't had a presidency really since 9/11. It's been completely hijacked. by the the British global Britain and its agenda. Let's put it that way, and that's where you get all the forever wars, etc. You have to go back to Clinton. That was a presidency, and Clinton was embattled, and he had a certain dialogue with Lyndon LaRouche in a certain way. But let's go to the first slide, because this is 1825, is 200 years ago. This is the anniversary of the presidency of John Quincy Adams. And we're celebrating this through the next year, really the next 4 years. But, and in a very important way, Quincy Adams, others shaped the presidency. But I always like to read this again and again, because it was always the conception that this nation stood for something and to set a policy agenda, a principle for the whole world. And he's talking, this is the famous speech he gave as Secretary of State, right, under James Monroe. So he's not the president yet, but it's part of the presidency, and he's definitely in it. And he's talking about the Declaration of Independence. And he says, in a conflict of 7 years, the history of the war by which he's talking to the Congress, maintained that declaration became the history of the civilized world. It was the first solemn declaration by a nation of the only legitimate foundation of civil government. It was the cornerstone of a new fabric destined to cover the surface of the globe. It demolished at a stroke the lawfulness of all governments founded upon conquest. It swept away all the rubbish of accumulated centuries of servitude. A nation was born in a day, but it stands and must forever stand alone, a beacon on the summit of the mountain, to which all the inhabitants of the earth may turn their eyes for a genial and saving light, a light of salvation and redemption to the oppressed. And then the paragraph on the bottom is what everybody knows, right? We are setting a standard of freedom and independence, but we're not going abroad in search of monsters to destroy. So you can go to the next slide. So this is Lyndon LaRouche in 1995, and he's talking about the presidents and these presidencies. And he makes a very sharp point. I'll just read through it. Contrary to Hollywood Anglophilia, the true character of relations between the United States and Britain is clearly demonstrated in the anti-monarchy policies of George Washington, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, and Franklin Roosevelt. Now, right here, he lays out our project. So, because all of those presidencies we're going to be looking at. Essentially, claims for all alleged community of principal interest between the United States and the British monarchy were always hoaxes. That point was emphasized most clearly by then Secretary of State John Quincy Adams in putting toward the draft of the anti-British Monroe Doctrine. The content of Adams' message on that subject applies today. From its beginnings, the vital interests of the United States of America have always been at irreconcilable odds with the British monarchy, from King George III through Winston Churchill's day, and under Queen Elizabeth II today, and under King Charles today. There can be no competent U.S. strategic doctrine or foreign policy which does not proceed from understanding of the nature of and the reasons for the irreconcilable principal difference in moral character between the British monarchy and the Constitutional Federal Republic of the United States. Okay, is that not clear? And that this is the test of a real presidency. You can go to the next slide. Because if they're not being attacked by the British monarchy, and that's why I mentioned Clinton. Clinton was under heavy attack by the British because he went to China. He wanted to work with China. He wanted to work with Russia. He had all sorts of other problems, there's no doubt about it. But he was definitely being attacked by the British. So this is from the farewell address. It's short. These are sections, but this is the last section on the idea of the role of the United States, the presidency, in foreign policy. So he says, against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. Okay? The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith, but here let us stop. Okay? So there's not going to be any long-term, we're not going to do a 100-year, agreement with Ukraine or some stupid thing like this. It's all in the betterment of each other, a community of principle. Harmony, liberal intercourse with all nations are recommended by policy, humanity, and interest. But even our commercial policy should hold an equal impartial hand, neither seeking nor granting exclusive favors or preferences, consulting the natural course of things, diffusing and diversifying by gentle means of commerce, but forcing nothing. And there's more to it. So I just, one thing I want to add, this is completely revolutionary. There's never been anything like the United States presidency. So because this is the first real republic, and so how are you supposed to make alliances to protect yourself? And everybody's saying, no, that's not what we're doing. We're upholding a standard of justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence and enshrined in terms of law in the Constitution. So you can just go to the next slide quickly. So what we'll be looking at in the series is not just the president. We're not going to do a series, a presentation on Washington and here's who he is. And it's on the presidency and how this played out and developed throughout history. Because this institution, as America became more and more powerful and less imperfect as a republic, became really the center of world history over the past century and a half, I would argue, coming out of the Civil War. Before that, not so much. But here, some of these presidents, the critical people behind them were part of the presidency. It wasn't necessarily just them. So you have George Washington there. The key person there in the presidency is Secretary Treasury Hamilton. You have Monroe, secondly, President Monroe. Secretary of State Quincy Adams, who we just heard from, who basically created this whole idea of the community of interest, and of course the Monroe Doctrine, which protected, said we're going to allow and protect republics in our hemisphere from British imperialism. Abraham Lincoln, until recently, there's been because of the work that we did, nobody ever heard of this guy below Lincoln there. His name is Henry Carey. Henry Carey designed the Lincoln administration in large part. Now, Lincoln, it's not to take any credit away from Lincoln, but he organized the election and he defined the economic policy, etc. So we'll be looking at that. Then you have one of my favorite examples, James Blaine. Right, you see him under the text that says Presidents James Garfield, Chester A. Arthur. He actually served under 3 different presidents. But he was absolutely critical in fighting off a British imperial takeover of the Southern Hemisphere. So he was a critical part of the presidency. And then one of my favorite examples, of course, you have Ronald Reagan. And an absolutely essential part of his presidency was the changing of world history that was done through the Strategic Defense Initiative. And that was, of course, negotiated with through Lyndon LaRouche and his back channel negotiations under the auspices of the presidency of Ronald Reagan with the Soviet Union. So that's the idea. And I have to stress what Diane brought up in the beginning. Young people that have, it's been a generation since 9/11, and so there's been no presidency. So people don't have any clue of what it means. And that should be clear by who we're putting in as the president, in the last, 25 years. So anyway, that's the idea. That's the project. Let's revive the presidency. Let's have a real, impact on world history for the good as we used to have.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Go ahead.
Well, I think this is critical right now. Again, as in the interview I did with Anton Chaikin a couple of weeks ago, I read a section from something he had just written, and I said it sounds like history is not an academic exercise to you, and that's the point. This is not an academic exercise. This is life and death right now, because you have this president right now, President Donald J. Trump, who the thing he has to understand, I think, and the thing that perhaps shocked a number of us, is that when you look at the Russiagate question and what Diane was has put together in this upcoming white paper on Russiagate, and the point that, you know, we hope that Tulsi Gabbard will begin to really be able to focus in on, and others, is the question of the British. This is the critical point that has to be made. And we know from the first Trump administration that Sir Kim Derrick, who was the ambassador to the United States, who was forced to resign in an embarrassing way, because the documents were leaked, that he was in fact flooding the zone, as they called it, to try to influence President Trump's policy. And then so you have the House of Lords report from, what was it, 2018, one report after the next from the British saying Trump could be the end of the special relationship. Trump is a fascist. Trump is this. Trump is that. He must be stopped. He must be smashed. He must not be allowed back in the White House. They even go so far as to pose, could we remove Trump through impeachment, through assassination? This is the British. And then to see President Trump sitting next to Keir Starmer last week, you say, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? You're sitting next to the enemy. You're sitting next to the people that want to destroy you. But the issue is, it's not personal. It's not about President Trump, the person. It's not your personal ego that's under attack. It's the presidency that's under attack. And because the British, who are experts at smelling an American president, they can smell one from a mile away. If they even get a whiff that that a president might be a real American president, as those presidents, and there are others in there that we can bring out and may talk about in the series. What was unique about those presidents? They had a healthy disdain for the British Empire system, and I think that's the critical thing. And Trump has got to get beyond his own ego on this. This is not about you, President Trump. This is about the presidency and the presidency of Donald J. Trump, to the extent that it does defend the sovereignty of the United States, and therefore the sovereignty of all nations on the planet, from this British system. And I think that is what we can get across in this upcoming discussion, because one thing you'll notice about many of those presidents, they were assassinated. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, attempts on Franklin Roosevelt before he was even in the White House. Any president that stood up in that way as an American president against the British Empire system, against the colonial system, was targeted. Now, there was a targeting of Donald Trump last summer, right? Targeting multiple times. So this is a time where President Trump has got to really get the sense, and I think with this white paper that we're putting out, getting it into the layers of government, getting it into the Congress, getting it, this is not a personality thing. This is life and death for the nation, and the institution of the presidency is that unique institution that was really designed by Alexander Hamilton. If you read the Federalist Papers on the executive branch, he's very clear on what is this institution that's being created. And then George Washington had in his mind for 8 years establishing this idea of the presidency. And he did a tremendous job, an absolutely tremendous job. He was not, he was no longer a Virginia planter. He was the president of the Republic of the United States. And to the extent that he ever was a Virginia planter, he abandoned any sense of that and became a real patriotic president of the United States. And that set the mold for all great presidents to follow. So this is an intervention that we're making right now, not an academic thing, not a nice history lesson. This is an intervention we're making right now to make sure that the presidency can function potently and join with the BRICS nations, join with Russia, join with China, join with the nations that are now moving in that direction, that that John Quincy Adams would have loved to see, that he had in his mind's eye, this community of principle among sovereign nation states. So I just wanted to make that point, and looking forward to this project.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the question, what is representative government? What does it mean to have the consent of the governed? What's the difference between that and a pure democracy? Because many people scream and holler about some of the measures that FDR took. For example, was it around the bank holiday, Bob? Maybe you know a number of these things. He said, if the Congress does not approve of this, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it by executive order because it's necessary for the nation. And the point, and it was actually Nicholas of Cusa in Concordantia Catholica, which was what, the 1440s?
1431.
Something, okay. That if we are truly all equal, then there is no genetic something or other. There's no bloodline that is what gives you the right to rule over others. It is by their choice, their free will, that they select a person in whose judgment they trust, because most people just want to live their life. They don't want to be consulted on every little detail of, you know, how much should we spend on pre-K education. Now, maybe a lot of parents with children will be interested in that, but older people, single people may not want to know every detail of that. So they're going to trust someone who they think has the interest of the principle of the general welfare at heart to do the investigation, to do the research, and to make those decisions. If you leave it to pure democracy, it sort of gets at what I describe as the difference between a consumer and a producer society, because it's whoever can make the glitzier package and convince the majority to support this, whatever it is. You know, hey, everybody, did you know that if you eat 5 tons of refined sugar, you will feel great and look great and blah, blah, blah. And you can brainwash people to do things that are totally self-destructive. That's why we don't have a democracy. And so I think this is very, very important. People have a lot of confusion also on our form of government. They don't know the difference between our constitutional republic and the parliamentary system, why this is superior, actually, in terms of getting things done. And I think this is very important. Bob, what?
I was just going to encourage, can I be heard? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to encourage people to read the Federalist Papers. You know, the idea that every person, every student in the United States in high school doesn't read through those papers is a crime. It's an absolute crime. And if you can't read all the papers, then read the 11 papers from 61 on Hamilton and the presidency. mean, it's all laid out because he's responding to the anti-federalists who are saying, you're going to make a king. And he's saying, nah, that's not what this is. And he lays it out in detail, you know. So I think that if you want to prepare yourself for our series, do that. It's absolutely, people don't know. They just don't know. You're absolutely right. So they have nothing to judge it against, you know.
Right.
And
It
again,
seems like
even the last quarter of a century, every single one of these presidents is a complete British pawn by intention. Bush, W, his father before that, even before 9/11. You know, Obama, first thing he does when he becomes president, he goes and kisses the Queen's feet or something. I don't know what he kissed. You know, and then that's why, as Chris was saying, they were so intent on keeping Trump out, because it's that he definitely was not necessarily one of those creatures. So people that were born in 2000, 1988, they don't remember anything that even resembles the presidency. But we do have something like that now. I mean, you have to, at least the guy does press conferences and stuff.
Yeah, I think they really profiled him. I mean, we know from Sir Kim Darroch, he has an absolutely enormous ego, and he likes the idea of royalty, unfortunately. It's a horrible vulnerability because he thinks he should run things that way. He thinks running the United States is the same as being an executive running a company. Right. And it's not. Right. And president is not the art of the deal as the New York real estate mafia. So happily, the most serious leaders, Putin, Xi Jinping, Lula da Silva, frankly, of Brazil, they have some, what's the word, forbearance, right? They want to allow space for him to do these crazy things, because if they were very rigid, the things that he is saying could have already blown up the world. But they are kind of saying, okay, we understand that this is how you do things, so we're just going to wait until you settle down, and we hope that you're going to come to the right policy that's in the interest of the United States. And then you have people warning, like this recent exchange between Trump and former Russian President Medvedev, which is rather sharp and frankly alarming. Now, we heard this morning that Steve Witkoff is heading over to Moscow, thank God. But it is very dangerous if President Trump can be manipulated in the way that it appears that he is being manipulated by various people. It literally looked to me like when he was in Scotland and he was speaking about the children in Gaza. I don't know if he'd ever seen a picture before. It sounds like he finally saw images, right? He said, oh, they're starving on TV, and the fences, we have to get rid of the fences. So suddenly something had gotten through to him, and he doesn't like seeing children starve to death. That's a good quality. Does he understand the relationship between his policies and the whole Zionist lobby and what's going on there? I'm not sure. But if the U.S. and Russia can establish a decent, normal diplomatic relationship, if the U.S. and China can establish a normal, cooperative, productive relationship, then it is the case that every problem on the planet could be solved peacefully for the good of mankind. And that's what the British absolutely want to disrupt. And the American people have to understand it. And the American people, we need people to love our nation for the right reason, not the wrong reason. That's the other reason to do this. Our nation was founded to do good. Our nation is not great because we do peace through strength, or, we bludgeon people into submission, or we're so powerful. No, we're powerful because of our goodness. That doesn't mean you're soft or you're weak. I think this is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, we're a city on a hill. And if you have that concept, then you're not trying to have unhealthy relationships with other nations, like our unhealthy relationship with Israel right now. But first and foremost, our unhealthy relationship with the United Kingdom.
I just thought of something. Be a city on a hill, not an outhouse on a hill.
Not an outhouse in a ditch.
No, but the hill is the image because what's coming down on top of everyone
Oh,
else.
I see. Yeah, right, on everyone else, right.
But it's also the case, just finally, that if you reestablish the American presidency as it was under what we're going to go through in the series, it's endgame for the oligarchy. It's over. There's no colonialism. They don't control Russia. In fact, these nations have in many ways emulated what the institution of the U.S. presidency was. That's what they're doing. Xi Jinping, that's what Putin is doing. And then you have lots of people like Robert Fico and Orban in Hungary. You know, these are real leaders, and there's no, and the global South is essentially going with that agenda. So there's not going to be any more British Empire. It's going to be a completely new paradigm and a new era for mankind. So that's what makes it dangerous, extremely dangerous.
So everybody pick up your Federalist Papers and start reading. So you're ready for the first one. Anything else you want to say, Bob or Chris, before we sign off?
Nope.
And I will say in closing here that everybody should please like, subscribe, share this video. Please sign up on the LaRouche Organization, theLaRouche.org, to do a monthly recurring donation. $10 or more gets you the Executive Intelligence Review Daily Alert, all of the intelligence that we're publishing, and the weekly journal online with all of Lyndon LaRouche's writings, the archive. It's an incredible package for just $10 a month or more if you can. And you please donate now, because we want to get this white paper out on the real enemy of the United States, which Russiagate allows us to get at with the release of all these documents, which is continuing, by the way. Gabbard released another one 2 days ago, and the media is not even covering it. So we have to break through the blackout, and we can't do it on social media. We have to do it in print media, hand to hand. That costs money. So please support us, and thank you for listening.